and finally to Orangeville Baptist Church, where she served as secretary into her 80s. Phil loved her work in the church office. Her church family was so very dear to her heart. Praising the Lord through music was very important to Phyllis. She was church organist and or pianist for decades at her church, including Third Reformed in Grand Rapids, Dawson Reformed in Plainville, and Orangeville Baptist in Plainville. In her younger years, she also was in demand as a soloist, teaming up with Joel Benjalink, a friend to this day. Their duets lit up the churches. If only we had recordings. Even up until her passing, she would play her favorite hymns on the keys in her enthusiastic, bouncy style. Phyllis was a friend to so many over the years. Everyone thought the world of her. These special people in Phyllis's life included her cousins, her former in-laws, her friends from days gone by, church friends, and her friends from Tuesday suppers across the lake. They kept up with her to the end through phone calls, beautiful cards, and meals when needed. When the get well cards would pour in, she would read each one carefully and was so touched. Her friends absolutely filled her with joy. Phyllis was a bright and beautiful woman and such a sharp dresser all her life. Her family members and many dear friends deeply grieve her passing, but understand she is now pain-free, and death is not the end, but a new beginning. Phyllis is survived by her family. Beth and Jeff Bordeaux have one daughter, Mallie Bordeaux, Nick Molesky. Randy and Donna Vanderclay have 4 daughters, Jennifer Vanderclay, daughter Amika, Tiffany, Michael, Flieger, daughters Brooklyn and Josie, Amanda Vanderclay, Sarah Matthew Walker, daughter Lily, their daughter Amber passed away as an infant. Lisa and Dave Knobloch have 5 children, Chris, Amber Knobloch, daughters Kylie, Elena, Gwen and Claire, Ashley, Tyler O'Malley, children Tyler and Caitlin, Nick, Kendra Knobloch, daughters Emma and Aylin, Nathan Knobloch and Adam Knobloch. She is also survived by her special cousins, Ruth Vanderhart and Dorothy and Leo Van Sant, and former husband Alvin, and in-laws Dale and Jackie Vanderclay and Marilyn Gould. Along with her parents, she was predeceased by her granddaughter and her husband Harley, and most recently lost her beloved Yorkie, Frodo. Well, we give praise to the Lord for saving Phyllis and putting into her heart a desire to love Jesus Christ and to serve others. That's certainly true with her family. You know, as church secretary here for many years, on Mondays we would have staff meeting right back in the office, and that which was often on her heart was her family, praying for her family, and often we would pray for her family. The most important legacy that Phyllis leaves is her love for Christ, and for all of your family to remember that she wants you to love Jesus, right? That was her number one priority, that all of her family would love the Lord Jesus Christ, that they would seek him, they would follow him, they would listen to him, right? I heard that many, many, many times, all right? There were tears in her eyes often. She wanted all of her family to love the Lord Jesus Christ. And so that is a tremendous legacy that she leaves you that is far beyond things, that's far beyond money, that's far beyond stuff, right? She loved Christ. She wanted her family to love Jesus Christ. Sharon and I counted her as a friend and as a good neighbor. What are we going to do now without our neighbor, Phyllis? And we're just going to share some memories there. There was a time, you may not know this, all right, that Phyllis and Harley was against Sharon and I in volleyball out in the field. We did. We played volleyball. Now, it wasn't for a long time, but we played volleyball out in that field, all right? A favorite story, this very piano right here, Phyllis and Sharon found that. I went back and looked at the notes. In 2002, it was from Kalamazoo. A family had bought this with great hopes, that they were going to be great pianists. And you know how often those hopes go. But they had this piano, and the church bought this for $6,500, and that family allowed us to pay so much a month. And Sharon and Phyllis found that, and these ladies were just so excited. And it's a beautiful instrument to this day. We're very thankful for this kwai, all right? Harley and I often would listen to the ladies as they played duets, piano organ duets. And one of the memories, you could be walking across the field there in the summer when the windows were open, you could hear the music floating out across the Orangeville neighborhood. And that's a precious, precious memory there. So she was also precious to her church family. Every one of her church family were enriched by knowing her. And I went back and looked. December of 1998, our Phyllis and Harley had been coming to our church. Phyllis had given her testimony of salvation. Harley had given his testimony of salvation. And so in that December date and one evening, they were baptized right here. Right? They followed Jesus Christ in believer's baptism, gave their testimony, and so they did that together on that winter evening in December. It was a time when the church needed a secretary, so it was about that same period of time, 98, 99, and so I went to Phyllis, and I know that she had recently been coming to church, and I just asked her, Sharon and I had talked to her, do you think, Mike? And she said, well, why don't you talk to Phyllis? So I went to her, and she said, I've been thinking about how I could serve in the church. That was her response. And so she did that for about 2 decades. She served here graciously, faithfully. And one of the things you need to remember, and this comes from somebody else, our missionary Rory and Christy are missionaries in Togo. And back years ago when they were in pre-field ministry, Rory would call hundreds of churches, literally hundreds of churches, to arrange opportunities to come and present their ministry. And in all those churches, all right, hundreds and hundreds of churches that Rory called, he said there was never a more pleasant voice on the other end of the phone than our own Phyllis Switzer, all right? I mean, she just had that way about her. And I always was so appreciative. I said, Phyllis, I love when you're here, when people call, they're not getting some foolish voicemail, They're getting a real live person who cared about you and what you had what your needs were. Her whole disposition, I loved her chuckle. I just loved to hear her chuckle. And who's her cousin from Iowa, right? All right, she loved going to Iowa, all right? And I would always say, now, she says God's country. She's God's country, go to Iowa. And I say something like that. Now, Phyllis, when you go to Iowa, you get to drive through a part of Indiana. And she would say, well, I'll pray for you, We always had this thing going about Iowa and Indiana, and I talked, hey, Steve Alford went to Iowa, and he coached for a time. And all. So we talk about that, and so we had fun. It was also a time during Bible school years ago. She was in the office there, in the morning, and she tells this story. She would always laugh. A little boy kind of peeked his face around the door back there, and he said, "Are you the principal?" No? She loved that. She was a delight to serve her as her pastor, and may God just multiply people like that in the church. Sharon and I were talking, remembering how Phyllis opened her home to ladies' Bible study. She would go to Grand Rapids and Toledo, and we couldn't remember how many times, to accompany, when our kids were in Word of Life Teens Involved, she would go along to accompany them on the piano, right? So Harley would go. I remember we were going to Toledo, to Emmanuel Baptist down there, and we'd have a great time. Big group would go down to Teens Involved. She was scheduled, I think a year ago in February, before she became ill and before COVID, she was scheduled to do Prelude before the morning service. She was ready to go with that. Last November, she and Nancy Jones did one Sunday night here an impromptu piano duet. She loved doing that. And she loved that Heaven medley. When We All Get to Heaven was in it, and the Sweet By and By. And she always would ask Sharon, when Sharon would go and visit her, to update. Phyllis wanted updates on people on the prayer sheet because she wanted to continue to pray intelligently for people. And there's this stanza in Sweet Hour of Prayer that says this: sweet hour of prayer, thy wings shall my petition bear. To him whose truth and faithfulness engage the waiting soul to bless. And since he bids me seek his face, believe his word and trust his grace, I'll cast on him my every care and wait on thee, sweet hour of prayer. And Sharon said a number of times in the last few days, who is going to take Phyllis's place as a prayer warrior? Who's going to take her place? Tabitha is spoken of in Acts 9 as full of good works and acts of charity. And that was Phyllis's life. And so, particularly to family, I want to challenge you to continue to listen to her life, to learn from her life, and to follow her life. She loves you. She wants you to be with her in heaven. Please keep the circle unbroken. Love Jesus Christ. And to church family, love Christ. And look at this dear lady's life, because even though she's with the Lord now, her life is still speaking very, very clearly. Okay?
Thank you, Dan. She really thought a lot of you all. She thought a lot of all the church family here. She really did. She'd talk about you all. I'm Chris, and I'm one of her grandkids. And on behalf of the family, we really appreciate you all being here.